We'll do some stump removal here. This one's a big one. Like that, man, that thing got rid of that stuff really fast. And just to think, you know, it'd take like 3 people forever to get that thing out of there, you know. You just saw how quickly that thing came out of there. And granted, some of it, half of it was rotten, but it still had roots that are still underneath there, but I got the most of it out of there. So yeah, this is what's going on up here. Just got a whole bunch of stuff. We had to pile everything up against this storage shed here because I'm clearing out a huge area. So this goes all the way back and behind that, the shed there. And so basically right now what I'm doing is I had to make this temporary access right here. This was like a big pit right here. And I set that up so I could make it around that building right there, because I got the camper up where I needed it to go, and the ground was a little bit too damp last night, and it was pitch black, and I was in here, or out here doing this, and I backed it up as far as I could. And that's about it. And even then, because the truck was leaning downhill, the back end of it was so high that this thing extended up all the way up to the top as far as that little foot could go, and it was lifting the back of the truck up. So, and it's because of this little lip right here where it comes down and goes flush up against it. I mean, it was locked up in there. Yeah, that was a whole bunch of fun. But now what I have to do is get the excavator again, or bring it down here, and I gotta take this thing and swing it over to where it needs to be. And that's what I'm doing right now. So eventually I'm gonna go through and collect all of this stuff right here, and I pushed it out of the way so I could level everything out, but I'm gonna go back through with the bucket with the forks on it there and just kind of rake all this stuff off of the sides and everything. But I didn't want to get rid of the cedar tree, and so I just drove around it. But yeah, that's what's going on here. And this is a lot of digging right here, a ton of digging. Cleared this all the way out. This is all just stumps and boulders, and you couldn't even really walk around out here without tripping over stuff under the grass that you couldn't see. So I basically widened this out around this boulder right here and started building a little retaining wall here for the garden setup. And of course it's not that pretty right now, but I'll arrange it a little bit better so it's cleaner. But yeah, so that's what I had to do. To dump all this dirt right here to make a little ramp so I could get up to that spot there, and now I just got to swing it over. There's no way to get the truck. I mean, it was just about jackknifed into that position right there. And the only thing that kind of sucks about these campers is that the trailer tongue is so short. I mean, it's right up against the back of the truck, so you make one tiny little fraction of a turn and this thing will start turning, which is, you know, it's cool and everything, but the backup camera doesn't really cover much back here. So it does work, but you literally have to get out every couple seconds, you know, and look, and when you're by yourself. So my wife wasn't up here with me, so I had to do this solo, and I got it onto this area here. That was the main mission. So now, like I said, I just have to reposition it. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I'll make another video in a little bit. Yeah, this one was definitely the biggest so far. As you can see, I kind of split it in half. You can see where the forks went right into it. So that's one half right there, and then this is the other half. And it was kind of cool because it really showed like how much power this excavator has. I mean, the roots went out. I mean, it must have been about 16 feet in diameter, and I started lifting up on it, and the whole ground in front of me started to lift up. But this thing was definitely dug right in, so it took a little bit of messing around with the bucket to get it out, but I finally got it out. It's amazing. It's just the tip of the iceberg when you see that stump, you know. here that's real interesting watching from behind. So yeah, you can see what I'm doing here. I was going to put these in a pile, but might as well just arrange them into a rock wall. So that's what I'm doing here. This little embankment right here. I'll probably fill this with a little bit more dirt and level it out for a little garden. So it's good though. Of course, I broke my phone tripod thing there. So probably good to stop for a minute anyway. These boulders are huge. Well, I shouldn't say huge, they're heavier than they are large, if that makes sense. It's really, really solid granite, stuff like that. So probably enough for now. It's 46 minutes. Wow. So yeah, it just got to the point where there's just too many rocks, so I'm gonna have to find another. I'm just gonna make a pile somewhere else because there's so many of them, and there's still a ton more that I have to collect. But that's all right. Working our way through here slowly. This was all nice and flattened out until I dragged all those boulders down here, but just show you guys what this looks like up here. This was all looked like that 2 days ago, you know, trees and everything, and now it's this. So the banks are really low angle slopes, so that's kind of cool. And we're gonna put some grass seed up there, some heavy duty grass to keep the erosion going on or under control. And yeah, this wall right here, it just ended up being like a huge wall of rocks, and I didn't like that. So you can see down at the end there, I started flattening it out, and I'm gonna work my way this way. But I also made a road all the way up there. I don't know if you guys can see those twin cedars right there in the middle. So I made this track all the way through there. It's pretty steep up there too. But yeah, it's just kind of frustrating here and there when you're trying to flatten stuff out and there are tiny little boulders everywhere, and you know, when you're trying to sweep with the bucket and everything, and you hit one stone, you know, the size of a basketball, and it stops the whole bucket and everything, and it's really not good for the swing motor. But this thing's working great. Got a whole bunch of stuff cleared out, and got to go down the road now. I gotta start flattening out a couple spots down there, and I put all the logs and everything into a pile over here. So these unfortunately are destroyed. There's the flathead beetle larvae that got into all of those logs, and I cut them. You know, I took all the time and everything to get these down here, and you know, they had no dirt on them. That was the other thing. I worked really hard to not get any dirt and sand and stuff on it so I could mill this stuff. And I came back probably 2 weeks later and started seeing holes all over the logs, and so they completely destroyed these. And these were really good, like old growth pine. So I'm kind of bummed out about that. They're just gonna rot. I mean, I could probably burn them and stuff, but you know. So it's, you know, tangled up in all of this stuff right here. There's pieces of wood, and you know, the guy that owned this place before tore out a lot of stumps, and he tried burning them. You know, like this is a stump from this guy that owned the property before us, and he just like set stuff on fire. There was a stump that was on, you know, that was just black from, obviously he was trying to burn it and everything. And but yeah, just a whole bunch of crap. He left a whole bunch of like dead stuff all over the place. There's another stump up in there. So really it's just like cleanup, you know, and I feel like I'm raking all these rocks and everything, but that's pretty much what's going on. Gotta get some more fuel for this thing. But yeah, that's pretty good for now. There's a trenching bucket also attachment that I will probably use when I get into like the really heavy duty rocks and stuff. And then there's the large scoop with no forks on the front of it that's good for like smoothing stuff out, and it's a larger volume I think than this bucket, and I'm going to use that and go through here and flatten everything out with that. And it's too bad this excavator doesn't have a blade on the front of it. It'd make things a lot easier, but it just takes a little bit longer without that. And it's hard because there's no real flat ground up here unless I make an area, and so you know, when you're swinging around trying to smooth stuff out and everything, it's all at angles, so it's a lot trickier than just driving forward with a blade that just pushes everything. So that's about it. I'm going to cut it short, and I'm just going to keep going. Gotta keep going, and that's about it for today. Rain stopped for a little bit, so that's a good thing. And we did get our camper up here. Brand new camper. We've used it once. And there's a whole bunch of videos that I took of that because we couldn't get this camper up here. The road is so steep, and there was nobody that had any sort of equipment to get it up here. So this excavator, this 315, pulled my 3500 Ram with the 6,700 pound trailer behind it up a 40-degree slope with no problem. It was kind of sketchy because I was worried about it, you know, tipping forward as I was pulling it up and everything, but you know, slow and steady, and made it up the hill. And so I would back up and extend the boom and then pull the boom in towards me. And the other thing that I probably mentioned it in another video, and this is kind of like a trivial thing, but it's not at the same time, you know, this is, you know, a load hook basically. It's also looks like a lock setup, but that hole is too small. You can't fit a chain through there, and you definitely can't fit the hook through there. So I don't know who's making these buckets, but make them so that the eyelet is bigger so that you can actually hook chains up to it. I'm sure all of the other buckets, or maybe most of them, are like that, but this one right here is tiny, and the hole on the side is what I've been using to run the chain through to, you know, lift stuff up, like the logs and everything. So yeah, that's it. Have a good day.
Don't. Oh, God. Yikes. Holy fuck.
So I finally got these out. I cut these down a couple weeks ago, and these are for milling, so used the excavator and got it onto the trailer, or got them onto the trailer. So yeah, there we go. Back for another day. It's raining today. It's not raining like really hard, but it's definitely raining. It's like a mist. The ground is not really that wet, so, or at least right now it's not. I'm just letting this thing warm up right now. Yeah, still have a whole bunch of work to do up here. All the leaves are gone. It's cold too. It's cold today. So it's going pretty smoothly so far. Basically, I'm gonna tilt this thing a little bit further as far as I can go before it slips off of the thing. So I'm gonna lower it down onto this piece of wood right here, and I should be able to back up the truck now. But I swung this whole trailer tongue towards me about 8 feet, so making progress here. I don't really have anybody else up here to help me, but I'm making it work. Freaking awesome. That worked. Well, we got the camper in place. Took a lot of messing around to get it in there, but it's in there. Now I'm just noticing this. You know, I left this tree. I didn't want to cut it down, but it's windy out right now and I can hear the thing creaking. It's a really tall tree and it's right behind the camper. It's kind of the only spot where I could put this, where we wanted to put the camper, so I don't know. We'll see what happens. 3 o'clock. One thing I noticed is that time flies like crazy in this thing. And it's probably because I'm not working for anybody. You know, if I was doing this for a job, you know, I wouldn't be saying that, but it does seem like time just flies in this thing. I love digging in the dirt and stuff like that, you know. Done construction work my whole life. And this is something that I could totally get into. It's relaxing. I don't know why, but I like it. So yeah, working on these spots over here. I cleared out another spot down there. And this is kind of going to be like a double tier kind of garden setup. So I'm going to flatten that out up there, and then it'll drop down a little bit to the next one. So I'm going to have to put some of these boulders along that wall there, or the bank, so I can section it off and everything. But yeah, these are some of the rocks, you know, like these are huge pieces, and the longer straight edge pieces I'm going to use to build water bars that go kind of at an angle across the drive down there, because when it rains up here, it absolutely floods down that whole road, and it carves a trench into it, and it runs all the way down to the bottom of the road. And we had huge, like, number 3 stone, huge, at the bottom of the driveway, and they're so big that when you're trying to drive up, it was like driving on ball bearings, you know. And all that stuff after the last flood, the first flood before the second one that was last year, the first flood, the river came right out of the woods, and it took all of the stones that were at the bottom of the driveway and flushed them into the woods on the other side of the access road down at the bottom. So there goes all of our stone. And the river, it came right out onto the road, and the whole road that we get up this driveway from was totally underwater. And so was the culvert. The culvert at the bottom was packed with mud. It was some old culvert that was really too small for what it needed to be. So the town went in and obviously saw that, and they put in a new culvert that's the right size. But you know, this is a lot of work up here. And you know, when you come up to a place like this and you're just looking at the land and everything, and you're kind of in your mind making a mental assessment of what you could be doing, you know. And I think a lot of it is just creativity, and a lot of people are creative and they have a lot of foresight and are good at planning stuff ahead of the time, you know. And we had basic plans. We just wanted our own land that we own completely, and you know, from that point we'll do what we do. Out of all the wood that I milled, except for the plywood and the shingles on the top, the whole thing was made out of, you know, trees that came from up there. I milled out, so whole bunch of stuff. I'm gonna have to extend the roof on it and everything, and there's still shingles up there from when I shingled the roof. It was pouring rain and I had to get off of the roof and everything, so I got to climb back up there and get those off. But I put a little stove in that shed there, and it's an awesome little setup. So it's also insulated underneath. I got foam and, you know, spray foam, the 2-part setup, and went all underneath the whole floor with a basement sealant. It's a little bit different than the standard stuff for walls and ceilings and everything. It's more of like a sealant, but yep, that's what's going on up here. This is all you know, I thought that this would be kind of be a cool area right here to put our, you know, primary structure or whatever, but this whole like bump right here is all ledge. This right here is just one little tip of the iceberg. It goes all the way around, all the way over to underneath all of that wood. So it really, you know, you can have like a whole bunch of plans and everything, and if you can't see what's under the dirt, those plans change, and then you're not doing what you wanted to be doing, you know? So that's what happened. I dug this stuff out and started flattening it out, and there's ledge underneath all of this stuff. And so this is not a good spot, you know? I don't want to be, I could be building on a ledge, it's, you know, but it's not really recommended unless it's, you know, engineered and everything, but that's about it. I'm gonna cut it short. Foliage is gone. I passed by a sign the other day that said you missed it. There's so many tourists in this area, and there's no the foliage is gone. But that's it. More later. I had to put the hat on. I was sitting in my workshop for forever, and my daughter used to use it when she was like 3 or 4. She used to walk around with it on, and I thought that was cute and everything. And now that she's older, she doesn't care about it anymore. But yeah, this is what, you know, this was my life for the longest time. I wore many different helmets, and this one was my favorite one. And I worked with a lot of cool guys, and kind of miss the construction field. I miss the guys. Like, I miss hanging out with all the guys and everything, and, you know, the camaraderie and the bullshit and the jokes and the shenanigans and everything. And, you know, I always seemed to be on a good team of people. You know, I didn't work with a lot of idiots, and I never really saw the guys that I work with get hurt, you know, other than outside of the job or whatever. So I had a guy that was a supervisor, and I was working for a larger company, this Parsons and Gilbane, and they do a commercial setup, and there's a huge peregrine falcon up there. I don't know if you can see it. Beautiful. Just white under its wings. Yeah, so this guy was a supervisor, and he'd worked for that company, and it was a large company. There were hundreds of employees, and it was one of the largest companies in the eastern United States, and he wanted me to take over his position. But the thing was is that he lived by himself, so he drove all over the place. He stayed in hotels, and we did that for a long time. I traveled on the road with him and everything, and we became really good friends. And it kind of sucked because after that first year, he was, you know, telling me that he was going to retire, and he wanted me to take over his job. You know, and I almost did it, but it would have been driving back and forth to Maine from Vermont, which is about 15 hours, and you constantly live on the road, you know, and my life was not conducive to that. I had other stuff that, you know, I couldn't be staying in hotels for an entire year and not be at home. And so I kind of passed on that. But one cool thing that came out of that is that I showed him a couple pictures of some of the tables that I made for a couple friends of mine. And, you know, these were like standalone projects. And I showed him some of the pictures, and he kind of looked at me. He's like, why are you working for this company? Like, why, you know, if you know how to do that stuff, if I knew how to do that stuff, I would not be doing this. You know, that's what he told me. He's like, you should really, really, you know, focus on this and try and figure it out. Well, that's what I did. You know, the economy tanked. All of a sudden, all the architects were out of business, which meant nobody was building anything. And I was at the top of the list for my union. I did work for the guy who ran it, and I did jobs when other people didn't want to do jobs, and I was at the top of the list for the callbacks. Well, that didn't matter. Everybody was out of work. There were about 65 people in our union that just couldn't do it anymore. And luckily I took that transition and it worked. I had nothing, you know, I started from nothing. I had a tiny little workshop that was 9 feet wide by about 14 feet in length. And the ceiling was about this high, literally just barely above my head. It was an old building, and I made it work inside that building, inside that little space, you know. I built my first tables and put them online, and before I knew it, I had people ordering stuff, and that was it. Those are the two-seaters. As you can see from the stump, how badly they're leaning, both of them. So they're just going to get taller and bigger and more hazardous. So I needed to do that to get the excavator up into this area here also. So let's take a look at this here. Rotten. It's all rotten in the center here. It's the same thing with all the other cedars that I've cut. So the smaller one doesn't have any rot in the center, but I'll still be able to use this stuff. So all of this is going to get used. It's a handy way to bring the chainsaw and all their stuff up here. That's it for now. Well, it doesn't really look the same anymore, but it's a little bit brighter now. That tree was definitely at its end. And it's kind of too bad. The whole center of it was rotten. But this really sketched me out right here. This is one of the trees that I kind of looked at for a long time, and I knew that it was eventually going to come down. There were huge dead branches that were falling off of it into our backyard, and one of them was massive and still had leaves on it. So it wasn't dead, but it broke off. And all the dead ones were still on there. Huge dead limbs. And this thing was spread out, you know, it went into a Y from the trunk. And so I looked at this for a while, many times, and I knew that cutting this thing was going to be really sketchy because it had a split in the middle. You know, the tree had a crotch in it, and it definitely, you know, was going to come apart. And luckily, it didn't come apart until it actually hit the ground, and you know, which is what happens or whatever. But there's one half of it right there, and that went up and onto our fence line, which is pretty simple to fix. It's just a wire fence. And we're gonna go over here and look at this really quickly. We can talk about this because this is what I was talking about. Yeah. Look at that. So that's what I was standing on right there. That's the ground that I was standing on. And this is so steep that I can't even stand on it without sliding. But this right here, I mean, that tree was massive, and I knew it was going to split. And if anything, I was going to get down here behind all this stuff. And, you know, as you can see, that's where the butt end of the left side of the tree landed up against the trunk. It's not touching the trunk, but or maybe it is in one spot, but you know, this is going to be here for a long time, this stump. I'm going to cut it a little bit shorter, but I'm going to leave it because this is a really steep pitch right here that goes down into a gully. And so I don't want this to erode or anything, and this will probably, I don't know, be here for 100 years until it rots away into nothing. But yeah, it's, you know, there's only so many ways you can look at something until you just get to the point where it has to be done. You can't like think about it anymore, and so that's the size. I mean, look at the size of the hinge on this other side here. You know, that's massive. That's my, you know, the spread of my hand right there. You can see how big that is, and it goes all the way across to here. So there were fibers that you could see where the hinges were, and you know, this thing started to tilt, and I could see it, and I could see that, you know, the ends of it at the corner of my eye, the top of the tree. And as soon as it started, you know, getting to about a 30-degree angle or whatever, that's where I ducked in behind this thing and let it slam into the ground. And so that, I have to cut that right there in half and drag it uphill. It's a really steep hill, but this trunk, it's probably a good 36-inch, maybe more, maybe less. But that's what the tree looked like right there. So it just cleaved right in half. And as you can see, that rot, it goes all the way up through the center. And the same thing on that side right there. You can see the whole center of the tree. And that's what I was looking at, you know, in terms of like the shape of the tree, and a lot of the bark was chipping off of it by itself. So yeah, it's a good size one. But like I said, you know, probably the sketchiest tree that I've cut, and it took time to really think about it and to try and imagine what was going to happen given, you know, the slight twist in it and all of the other factors that would make it come apart at the bottom. So I got it down, and that was the other thing, is that I didn't want it to hit anything, because we have a neighbor's house is right, that's like a tiny little house right there. Obviously it's their neighbor's house, but they're nowhere near this part of it. But you know, the ends of the branches, I didn't want it to hit that neighbor's little house right there. So I think I did a pretty good job. You know, one side of the tree went that way and the other side of the tree went this way, and we missed the greenhouse. They took the panels off the roof anyway, so for the winter time. But yeah, this is a lot of wood. A ton of wood. This is a ton of it. So I'm gonna have a lot of wood to burn with here. And it's too bad that the stuff is really twisted and it's hollow in the center, because it would have been nice to mill some of this stuff out. I might be able to, but we'll see what happens. A good old 592, man. I put a little sharpening on it. It just needed a slight touch up. It's brand new chain, but I did a whole bunch of cutting a couple months ago with it. And yeah, so that was the other thing. I hadn't run that thing for, I don't know, a month, maybe, something like that. And you can see in the video of me cutting it, there were times it was just grabbing the chain, and because it was so sharp. And the other thing I wanted to mention really quickly is that, as you can see right here in my undercut, I can't remember what it's called, if it's the scarf cut or face. But as you can see here, I started doing my angle, my cut, you know what I'm saying? I don't know why this looks like it's on a curve, but I saw that it wasn't going to meet up where I wanted it to on the other side. And so I readjusted and recut the that angled cut right there, and it worked out perfectly. So I saw that that's what, you know, you can do if it's not going to line up. Just start over again and do another cut, and so that it met up perfectly. And it met up absolutely perfect on the other end. It was a 28-inch bar, and it was just barely, it was not sticking through, but I stuck my fingernail in through it and just peeled the bark off on the other side. And it was a tiny little Dutchman, about a half an inch deep or whatever, so I cleaned that up and just, you know, dropped it from there. It's a huge tree, and you know, it's part of nature, and a lot of animals loved this tree and lived in it, and that there were tent caterpillars, and that was the one thing that they just hammered the top of the tree and killed all the leaves and everything. And I don't think that's what started breaking all the branches off. I have no idea, really. I'm not a forester, but it's good wood. There's some of it that's a little bit foamy here and there, you know, where it's beginning to rot. And you can see it in some of these pieces right here. You know, it looks dark and everything, but that's like soft in the center there. It's starting to rot. So, and as you can see right there, there's actually holes in it. Must have been a spectacle, though. This was a massive tree when it fell, and people were driving by on the road, so it must have looked interesting. But this was on our neighbor's property. Is right on the corner of our neighbor's property, and so I went and talked to her yesterday and talked to her about the trees and everything, and the fact that it needed to come down. And she said, yeah, fine, you know, it looks like it needs to be cut down. And so that's what I did. And there were some trees in the backyard, as you can see, that massive dead tree right there. Well, these trees right here are ultra tall pine trees, and one of those came down the other night in like pitch black darkness. I heard this popping. It sounded like somebody was shooting, and then all of a sudden it's super loud crashing and cracking of branches and everything. And yeah, one of those trees came down, and it took out all the branches off of a whole bunch of other trees back there. And I thought it had fallen into her barn, so I went over there and talked to her. So anyway, yeah, there's some other big trees behind that, but that's what's going on here. This was a project, so I knew that this was going to turn into a ton of work right here, and so that's what I've been doing, is chopping everything up and getting it ready to transport it uphill to the log splitter. But that's it, you know. I had to go for it, and it worked out.